I have this friend. He's a sheriff at the county jail, and he tells me stories sometimes when we sit and talk about what it's like down there. And what always kind of astounds him and amazes him is he's got numerous stories of times they brought in some woman or some little skinny guy who tops weighed 125, 130 pounds, and it says these four huge sheriffs can barely wrestle them to the ground, can barely get them subdued to get cuffs off of them and get them in a jail and make sure they're in a cell and that they're safe and something. He goes, sometimes even tasers don't work. It's amazing to me. And he was confused by the fact that they're small, they're tiny, they're just like, and he goes, I know they're drug addicted. Sometimes they come in pretty high, but drugs aren't giving them superhuman strength. And he's just amazed that tasers won't work, the brute strength won't work, that sometimes they do the best they can to sort of hold them down, get them safe, get them, the cuffs off them, get them in a cell where they're going to be okay. And I said to him in one of those conversations, I said, and he is not, by the way, at all a spiritual man. He doesn't think through those grids at all. And I said, do you think they're demonized? He sat back for a moment and he thought. He said, could be. After a moment, he goes, yeah, I think so. And I was intrigued by the fact that here my friend, who would not be considered a Christian or even think about spiritual things, had come up against pieces of evidence in his experiences that told him there's more going on in our world than is explainable by rationalistic Enlightenment thinking. What do I mean when I say that? Well, if you're in a Western country, if you're in, Europe, if you're in the United States, America, Canada, Northern Hemisphere of the Americas or Europe, you are influenced by the rationalistic Enlightenment. In the 1700s, there was a thinking that came about that was basically said, human mind, human reason can categorize, analyze, and discover anything there is. And anything that is outside our reasonable abilities just isn't true and doesn't exist. And therefore, if we can touch it, I can taste it, I can see it, I can hear it, I can smell it, I can measure it, I can weigh it, those things are real. Anything outside of that is not real. That's kind of been the way our educational system has operated. So it's very difficult for those of us in the West to actually embrace spiritual things. But by the millions, we've had experiences that are not explainable by the rationalistic Enlightenment alone. And there's many of us who say, oh, there is truth beyond our five senses and what we can measure and what we can weigh. If you are at all a student of the Bible, you will come to realize sooner or later, hopefully sooner, that the scriptures alone are not telling us how to be moral and ethical. They're not about how to have human behavior be right. They're not about do's and don'ts. It's like that is not the central theme. That's a secondary theme, what we would call fruits of the Spirit of God. The central theme is that we live in a spiritual world where God is at war to break down the kingdom of Satan and destroy it, which has held human beings captive since the fall of Adam and Eve. And he is here to rescue us, redeem us, and restore us with his power and his might. In other words, God is at war. I'm doing a sermon series called Seven Great Miracles of Jesus. And this particular one that we're running across, I'm calling Heaven Takes Hell. Because it is a moment in the Gospels when Jesus opens the eyes of his apostles to a bigger dimension of spiritual truth and spiritual reality in the world that we live in. And in so doing, he teaches us as well. So let's take a look at this story that's been commonly called to and referred to in Christian circles as the Gerasene Demoniac or the Gerasene Demoniac. It's the same region, the same location, and it occurs in three different places in the Bible. It occurs in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we'll read at least two of those today. Before we do, I'll give you a little background on kind of what has happened. This is super early in Jesus' ministry. He's growing in popularity and influence. He has gathered his apostles. They've begun hanging out with him. They have watched him do the Sermon on the Mount. They have seen him do miracles. He's done healings. He's done some minor deliverance of people. He's done some things that just boggle their minds that he's not just a normal rabbi. He's getting super popular. At one point, he's over in Capernaum on the west side of the Sea of Galilee, and he has them load up, get into a boat, because he tends to get across to the east side of the Sea of Galilee. And that night, they will get trapped in a huge storm, which will terrify them while Jesus sleeps in the boat. And I did a talk about that called In the Storm. And that was one of the miracles where Jesus calmed the storm. So they have seen Jesus in his power over human physical problems and healings. They have seen him teach the words of God in a way that was profound and insightful and authoritative and stirred their hearts. They have seen him actually controlling nature. And now, at this point, they're going to watch him and his power over the spiritual forces of darkness and evil, over what we would call demons. So, a little story on the side. He's crossing over to a region that, in their day and age, was called the Decapolis, which is 10 cities. Deca, polis, 10 cities. The Decapolis, and so they were this region of cities on the east side of the Sea of Galilee that. In ancient historical times, that was the region of the tribe of Manasseh. So it was originally Jewish in its kind of origin of people who stayed there. But over time, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, different people groups had conquered that, had laid waste to cities. They'd been invaded. Different things had happened. And slowly and over time, it lost its control, it lost its Judaism. In the time of Alexander the Great, 350 years before Jesus-ish, Alexander the Great would come through and they would re-inhabit, settle those cities, colonize them with Greeks as Greek city states, known as Hellenization. The Greeks referred to themselves as Hellenes. That's what they called their country. And so they were Hellenized. They were brought in Greek culture, Greek customs, Greek food, Greek architecture, Greek religion, Greek science, all those things that would be done there. So the region was very pagan. It was worshiping Apollo, Zeus, and Aphrodite. In addition to those other people groups who had been there, they were quite the cosmopolitan mix and mingle of people. And inside there was some minor Jewish people who had stayed in, kind of hung in there and blended into society and worked fairly well inside that region. But the Jews who were there even weren't what they would consider super kosher. The Jerusalem Jews and even the Jews of Galilee would consider them sort of backwater and a little bit compromised, and they would see them as people who had not kept pure to the faith and not been strong at all. So Jesus is loading his apostles in a boat, heading over, going to have a storm that night. They'll arrive the next morning, and Jesus is doing this all for the sake of encountering one man. Let's take a look at the story. I'll be reading from Mark chapter 5, and we'll look at I'll be starting to read from verse 1. Of course, I'm reading from the New King James Version. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs. And no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been around, or often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." And then he asked him, "What is your name?" And he answered, saying, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Also he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, "Send us to the swine, that we may enter them." And at once Jesus gave them permission. And then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. So those who fed the swine fled, and they told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that had happened. And then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion, sitting and clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who saw it told them how it had happened, him who had been demon-possessed about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from their region. And when he had got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them what greater things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you." And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. That's the version in Mark. There is also a version in Matthew chapter 8, verses 28 through 34. I'm not going to read that during this session, but I will read the Luke one. The Luke one is found in chapter 8, beginning in verse 26. Here's the Luke version of the same story. And then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he stepped out on land, there he met a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. And he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for it had often seized him, and he was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles. And he broke the bonds and was driven by the demon into the wilderness. And Jesus asked him, saying, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," because many demons had entered him. And they begged him that he would not command them to go out into the abyss. Now, a herd of many swine was feeding there on the mountain. So they begged him that he would permit them to enter them. And he permitted them. And then the demons went out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the lake and drowned. When those who fed them saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. And then they went out to see what had happened and came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. They also, who had seen it, told them by what means he who had been demon-possessed was healed. And then the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. And he got into the boat and returned. Now the man from whom the demons had departed begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your own house and tell what great things God has done for you." And he went his way and proclaimed throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. Okay, so there's the two stories of at least Mark and of Luke of what this Gerasene demoniac experienced, and Jesus healing him. So let's look at it and see some things that we can learn from it. All right, first off, this guy is living in the tombs. He lives there naked, and living in tombs is already bizarre. He won't live in a social construct with people. He is too wild. He is too violent. He's too insane. He's screaming and yelling and screeching. We know from Mark that he's a cutter. He takes stones, and the Greek word actually used means to strike with blows. So he's picking up stones and hammering and cutting himself, his legs, his body's covered in wounds and torments from these demons that are attacking him and mentally disturbing him and disrupting his body. And whether it's him trying to get the pain out of him and drive these demons out, or whether they're doing it to him, we don't know. But his body is covered in bruises and deep cuts. This blow would be severe wounds to him. He's naked. He cannot have any constraints or social constructs. To a Jewish person, that would be a great and terrible shame. So he lives naked, and he lives in the tombs where dead, unclean things are, where it'd be ritualistic and pure for anybody in the ancient times to spend time in a cemetery or tombs. That would just be unheard of. You'd have to go home and take ritualistic baths after being there just to be clean, to mix in society again. But this is where this man lives. And so we know that he's exceedingly fierce, that they put chains on him, they shackle him, and he's powerful enough that he can even break those bonds, which shocks and surprises everybody. Like, we can't restrain this guy. Whatever is going on with him, we cannot subdue him. We can't calm him down. We can't tame him. We can't protect him, and we can't protect people from him. And so you can imagine that this guy who's running naked and screaming in the tombs, and I can't even imagine what would happen when somebody's grandmother died. They're like, oh, we better find a new burial ground because we sure as heck can't go there, right? I mean, it would have been this turf and this territory that you would steer clear of and go wide around, and you wouldn't go near because this crazy wild man was out there. And he was something more because they knew that they could not restrain him. He had this superhuman strength about him. And this is the situation that Jesus waltzes into. Jesus just shows up on the shore, and it's amazing when he gets there that Jesus begins dealing not with so much with the man right away, but with the demons who are controlling this man. So our first kind of question is, does Jesus think demons are real? And you read the story, it's like, oh, absolutely, Jesus thinks they're real. They're not limited by our three dimensions of space, right? Height and width and depth. And they're not limited by that. They're not limited by, and we have the dimension of time too. They're not limited by that. These spirit beings can inhabit this person, multiple of them within his physical framework, and thousands of them can fit there because they're spiritual beings. They are not physical beings. We learn that. We know that it's not a psychological problem because his crazy, unusual strength to break bonds and shackles and fetters that are put on him, he can break them. And also, we'll get to it a little bit in a moment, the pigs story show this is not just somebody with a psychological therapeutic problem. And in addition, what we see is Jesus speaks to the demons, treats them as real, deals with them as real, and deals with them as different than the man himself. And so this is Jesus's thing. Now, a while back, I did a story on, for some of you, you think of demons, then the Bible is clearly the Bible's teaching the spiritual reality of the world we live in is that there are angels, there are demons, they do interact with human beings. And this is actually the Christian understanding of the right worldview, is that we are not alone on this planet. We are not up to just human autonomy. There are bigger things going on than just our will and our reason. That there's spiritual forces at play, both good and evil. A while back, I did a sermon called A Snake in the Garden. It's on my channel, robbryson.com. You can look at my YouTube channel. You can also look at, obviously spelled my way with Bryson, Bryceson. You can look at Rob Bryson on my YouTube channel and find A Snake in the Garden. Randy Kay as well has posted it on his ministry channel, on his YouTube channel. It's about an hour long, but it goes in great detail, the origin of Satan. If God is all good, where did Satan come from? And it deals with where Satan came from, as well as, especially, I think, the powerful ending in the last 10 minutes is really strong. Well, why does he allow them to even exist? Why does he just obliterate them? What's going on there? So take a look at that, and you'll see the origin of these demonic beings. But let's get back to our story. Okay, in our story, what's interesting is the demons fully recognize Jesus. The apostles, they're seeing Jesus. They're still figuring out at this point in his ministry, they're still figuring out who this incredible rabbi is. They believe he's this great teacher, a human guy with his unusual powers, and every now and then he's revealing to them he's something way bigger, way more than just another rabbi with an unusual connection to God. And over the course of the 3-year ministry, they will come to fully understand he is God in human flesh walking amongst them. At this stage in the story, they're still in the process of discovering that. But the demons can see the reality. They can see the truth. They see who Jesus really is. And so they can come, and they actually come screaming, running up to Jesus. They throw themselves down, and they refer to him as Son of the Most High God. They immediately know who he is. He is the power they cannot run away from, that they can't get away from. They are terrified of him. They are throwing themselves down at his ultimate power over them. And then they begin to beg him to not torment them before the time. So what's interesting is Mark, the Luke, and even the Matthew all record that these demons fall at Jesus' feet, terrified and referring to him as Son of God. They know who he is. They see him for the truth of what the human eyes cannot see. I think it's interesting. So then they fall down at his feet. There's a great book regarding spiritual things of the demonic and the angelic. And it's kind of the definitive work amongst so many scholars, so many people who are intellectually trying to tackle this. It's a great, good work. Dr. Ed Murphy's Spiritual Warfare, or actually the Handbook on Spiritual Warfare. And as you can see, it's no light, easy read. He has a section in his book on this particular moment, this story in the Bible. And I'm just going to quote a few things that Ed Murphy says out of his book, which I highly recommend you get if you're going to explore this topic deeper. He says this: next we discover the demonic's initial response to Jesus' presence. When he was a distance from Jesus, he recognized him. Instead of running away from him, as we are told the demonized will usually do, he ran straight to Jesus and bowed down before him. We are frequently told that another symptom of demonization is repulsion in the presence of Jesus. Demons want no contact with Jesus or his people. That's why demonized people stay away from Christians. They will never go to church, we are assured. This is not necessarily true. Why then did the demoniac run and throw himself at Jesus' feet? Well, I suggest several possible answers. 1, I don't know, nor does anyone else, because the Bible doesn't tell us. 2, According to Mark, whenever the unclean spirits beheld him, they would fall down before him, crying out confessions of his divine person. You are the Son of God, was the most common spontaneous confession. Jesus even had to earnestly warn them not to reveal his identity. Something here needs further exploration. There is a deep mystery in this seemingly contradictory reaction of demons to his presence. They fear him, yet they seem compelled to pay him homage. 3, since whenever demonic speech is recorded, that homage is always in the context of a spontaneous confession of his deity, lordship, and his role as their future judge, it is probable that their confused response to him is because of their overwhelming fear that he will punish them now before the time. After all, they had no idea when the appointed time would arrive. In deliverance ministries today, they do the same. They will even confess that their master Satan is a deceiver who is destined to burn in the lake of fire with them. They will confess that Jesus has defeated them, or him and them. Just as we are discovering here in Mark, they will not confess him as their Lord, but they will confess that he is the Lord. And then 4, there's always the possibility it is the demonized man himself here who is so strongly drawn to Christ. As the poor, bruised, and tormented victim fights off any demonic interference to his being drawn towards Jesus, the demons are caught, so to speak. They can't stop him. Wherever their victim goes, they go too, often in the blazing glory of Jesus' holiness. They come into full manifestation, confessing in fear who he is and what he is going to do to them. They appeal to him to leave them alone and plead that he would not torment them before the time. Dr. Ed Murphy, Handbook on Spiritual Warfare. Okay, so we can see that there's something going on here, that they're confessing he's the Lord. They're terrified of him. So they begin, in Mark it says, they beg him, quote, not to send them out of the region or out of the country, right? It's an entry word. So there's a territorial issue here. They're begging Jesus in Mark not to send them out of the region. So somehow these demons are saying this turf, this territory, this region of the Decapolis is our domain. We derive power here. We have influence here. Something that has happened in the human dimensions there, where they're worshiping the pagan gods and doing pagan practices and idolatrous works. Those are inviting the demons there and actually giving the demons power if they stay in that territory. If they leave that territory, they seem to be losing their power because of the practices of the human beings within that region. This is given a lot of thought to many Christians who believe there is such a thing as territorial spirits, that there are regions in a different country, a different city, a different county, because of the practices and behaviors and moral codes of the people who live there, that they have actually created a space where demons can flourish and cause torment and havoc on people in a worse way than if they weren't doing those practices. Somehow the human connection is tied to the territory, and it invites the demonic connection to that same territory. All right, so they don't want to go to the region. And then they ask, do not torment us before the time. What are they referring to? What is it that they mean? And it's a fascinating or it's fascinating thought, because they're thinking about somehow they're aware that a day is coming when a destiny is going to be fulfilled, where they will be cursed, they will be punished, they will be destroyed. And they're wondering, when they encounter the Son of God on the shores of the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis, is that now? Is now the time when you're finally going to do what we knew you said you'd do from way back with Adam and Eve? From the dawn of time, we knew a day would come when we would be destroyed. And they're trying to wreak havoc until that day comes. So they're asking him, have you come to torment us now before the time? Which is an indication they're kind of aware societally, it's too early. It's too early. You shouldn't be here now. You shouldn't be doing this now. It's interesting. There's a verse in James chapter 2. In James chapter 2, verse 19, it says, you believe that there is one God? Well, you do well. But even demons believe, and they tremble. It's an interesting thought James was telling the church. He's like, some of you think, well, I'm good because I believe in God. I believe in God, so I'm good because all I need to do is believe in God. And he's basically saying, you think that's it? You think that's all you need to do? Because demons believe in God. They believe in God too. And they at least are wise enough to be scared of him. They're at least wise enough to know that they should tremble in fear over a divine God with all that power, all that glory, all that might, and all that majesty, who's going to have to, because of his nature, destroy what is evil and wicked. And at least they're smart enough for that, even if humans aren't. And so they're asking this question. They know their end is destruction. And it says, interestingly enough, in Luke chapter 8, as we read, they were terrified of being thrown into this place called the abyss. What is the abyss? They begged him that he would not command them to go out into the abyss. Luke chapter 8, verse 31. There's another verse in Jude. I'll just quote it for you. You don't need to read it. Jude 1:6 says, and the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Interesting verse that there's this place there. This word abyss is also known as, it's abusos is the Greek word. And it's also translated elsewhere in the New King James Version of the Bible as bottomless pit. That's another way abusos gets translated, not just abyss. And that's found actually referred to at least 3 times in Revelation chapter 9. Let's take a quick look at Revelation chapter 9. I'm going to go back there and take a quick peek at what this says, because it's an interesting thought of this demonic situation that is on our planet, or at least interacts with us. Revelation 9:1. The Apostle John is caught up into the third heavens. He's seeing what's going on in the spiritual dimensions. He's understanding the scope of human history. He's writing about his times. He's also writing about the last days. And in that, he sees visions of spiritual truths that are very hard for him to put into human words and encapsulate, but he's doing his best to as he writes Revelation, but we're led into by the power of the Holy Spirit, and the words of John were like the veil gets lifted and we read into what the last days will be like. And he says this in chapter 9, verse 1. Then the fifth angel the fifth angel sounded. He's got a trumpet. And I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. I've mentioned in the Snake in the Garden sermon that stars are often a phrase or a euphemism for angelic beings. And I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke locusts came upon the earth, and to them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. They were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth or any green thing or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. And they were not given authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months. Their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. In those days, men will seek death and will not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. The shape of the locusts was like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were crowns of something like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. And they had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots with many horses running into battle. They had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months, and they had as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he has the name Apollyon. Okay, so Revelation chapter 9 is clearly John seeing something spiritual. They're referred to as locusts for their devouring, and they're actually hordes and hordes of them who devour. But since they don't eat anything green and they can't eat trees or plants, we know they're not real locusts. And in the description of them, it becomes very apparent these are some sort of demonic horde of creatures, and they are given power to hurt and harm human beings for 5 months in such a way that they cause such great pain and suffering that humans beg for death, but for 5 months, nobody will be allowed to die. Like death will be removed from humanity, and only pain and suffering and languishing torment will be there. And then these creatures come from some place called the bottomless pit, that there's these keys to the bottomless pit, which is known as the abyss. And then, of course, Revelation chapter 20, verse 10 will say, the devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. That's the final end of the Satan and his horde of demonic angels. They are cast into the lake of fire. So what's the summary of this little bit right here? Well, the idea is the demons know that a day will come when they will all be destroyed. They know there will come a time of great suffering. It seems there are some demons who are allowed to run and be rampant on the earth now, and others who have been locked up and held into this abyss, this bottomless pit of darkness, and they're chained and confined there. At the very end of time, during the Great Tribulation, that pit will be unlocked, and all of those demons who've been held for who knows how long a millennia will be released on the earth to torment humankind until God finally judges them and he destroys them in the lake of fire along with Satan and Satan's false prophet and the Antichrist and, known as the beast. And so this is the final end. These demons in this story on the seashore of the Sea of Galilee, they're aware that this is their end and this is what's going to happen. And they're wondering, is it going to happen now? Are they going to be thrown into the abyss now, or are they going to be destroyed now? And they're terrified of Jesus over that. And here's Jesus. It says in the text that he's coming to them, and it says he had been commanding the demon to come out of him. Now, Jesus doesn't have to say things twice. He's got absolute authority as the Son of God. So if Jesus was commanding them to come out, every time Jesus made a command, a demon was taken, a demon was taken, right? He's just... And then there probably came a point when Jesus, to show the apostles what was going on, he's like, as he was speaking, demons were fleeing. So finally, he just kind of stops that and says, what is your name? And in the process, the demon responds, my name is Legion, for we are many. And so this is why, as Jesus was come out, demons were coming, but literally thousands of demons were in this guy. Thousands. When he said legion, everyone would have understood. A Roman legion was in full strength about 6,000 soldiers. Rarely was a legion at full strength. Usually they were anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 soldiers in a legion. And that would be considered pretty typical. But it's telling us this guy had thousands of demons inhabiting him. And at minimum, we don't know exactly how many, but at minimum, we would say he had 2,000. Because there was 2,000 pigs who were going to rush over the cliff. And a 1-to-1 ratio, one demon for one pig, he's got at least 2,000 demons in him. What had happened in this man's life? What had happened in his upbringing? What had happened in the decisions that made? What had happened to torment him so that the opportunities for demons to come into his life and manifest and take over, many to the level of thousands of them? What kind of horrible tragedies and issues had happened? What behaviors had gone on? What had he done and what had been done to him so that thousands of demons could inhabit him? We don't get that part of the story, but we know it must have been huge. A huge amount of pain and suffering and wickedness and evil had gone down in this guy's life, because there's at least 2,000, which brings us to the pigs. Okay, so we know there's at least 2,000 pigs. And it's interesting because you have the demons who are begging Jesus not to send them to the abyss, but they got to go somewhere. They don't want to be sent out of the region. They don't want to be sent into the bottomless pit. And so they basically say to Jesus, what about the pigs? There's all those pigs on the hill. Can we go there? And Jesus grants them permission to go into the pigs, which are on the hillside there. This is the sign that this problem this man has is not mental. It's not psychological, because the pigs would not have reacted the way they did if this guy had a psychological problem. I read one commentary from William Barclay. He was saying he couldn't quite fathom the spiritual dimension. He wasn't quite ready to embrace all that meant. So his thing was, well, this guy screaming and yelling scared the pigs, and that's why they ran off the hillside. This guy had been living in the tombs for years. He had been there for years, howling and shrieking and cutting himself and being captured and bound with chains and breaking free and getting back. Those pigs were totally used to him by now. They weren't getting suddenly scared that he started screaming. Again, those pigs and the herdsmen who were there, this was a common occurrence. So no, it's not a psychological problem. It's not that the pigs got scared. Plus, pigs are a super smart animal. And just because somebody's screaming doesn't mean they're going to run off a cliff and commit mass suicide, because they're a smart animal. And on top of that, well, that alone, pigs can swim. So that meant they had to fall from a great height. Pigs are not going to knowingly throw themselves off a cliff. This is not a psychological problem. The pigs are the proof that something spiritually powerful is going on in this particular moment. And it's interesting because Adam Clark, he lived about 120-ish years ago, and 1880s, 1870s, he was in that region. Adam Clark wrote a commentary. He says this, if I can get a right quote, he said, "Send us away" seems to express more fully the absolute power Jesus Christ had over them. Permission alone was not sufficient. The power by which they were to go away must come from Christ himself. How vain was that boast of Satan in chapter 4, verse 9, when he offered Jesus the kingdoms of the world if Jesus would just bow down to him. When we find he could not possess the body of one of the vilest animals that God has made without the immediate authority from the Most High. Since a demon cannot enter even into a swine without being sent by God himself, how little is the power of malice or any of them to be dreaded by those who have God for their portion and their protector. Yeah. That's a good quote. I look at this as like the yelling didn't cause the pigs to go over the edge. The pigs, here's what's interesting. When the pigs got possessed, which is literally what happens, it teaches us a couple of odd things. First off, it says, can animals be demon possessed? The answer seems to be yes from the scriptures. Yes, they can. But here's what's interesting. Why do the demons throw themselves off, or the pigs, I'm sorry, throw themselves off the cliff? One answer is because the pigs won't tolerate being possessed. Humans will tolerate being possessed, but not pigs. They're like, no, if this is going to be the state, we're done. And so the pigs literally are committing suicide because they're demon possessed and they won't tolerate it. Another view is it's the demons themselves who are causing the pigs to run off the cliff, and they're driving the torment of the demons inside the pigs, and the torment of those demons from Jesus Christ and his power is causing the mass suicide. And so one of those two things is why these pigs commit suicide. And then this miraculous healing takes place in this man. He's clothed, he's sane, he's relieved. I'm sure, knowing all the stories of Jesus, that Jesus put hands on him and healed those gashing wounds, that he restored him to wholeness, because Jesus would not leave unfinished business. That is not the nature of Jesus. And he puts him all back together again. And of course, the herdsmen watching the pigs, they're terrified of what they just see. And we read in both accounts, they're terrified because of how they saw this go down. What they saw was this guy came, got out of the boat, and with only his words did something we could not do with chains and with fetters, and we could not control. All of us had tried, and this guy could do it with his words. He just spoke, and thousands of demons left, entered the pigs, and look what the pigs did. I mean, they're terrified. So they go. I'm always intrigued why they don't go tell the owners of the pigs. They run to the city, on the country. They start to tell everybody what went down. Why? Because they were scared. They were scared of what they had just seen and what they had just experienced. And so in their fear, they start telling the townspeople, oh my God, you know the crazy man who lives out in the tombs? The guy who's naked and runs around screaming? Oh, the cutter? Yeah, that guy. He's fine now. Some guy got out of a boat. Some Jewish guy got out of the boat, just spoke, healed him. Next thing we know, the pigs were dying. They're telling this whole story. And everybody's like, I got to go out and meet this guy. So the whole town, the whole countryside gathers together. They go out. Now, I'm sure Jesus has had most of the day just hanging out with this healed, demonized man who's now been set free, talking, speaking to him, teaching him, telling him some truth. They're just sitting down by the seashore, and the apostles got to watch all of this go down to see what was happening. And they were now like, Jesus was showing them immense things about his own power. And so the townsfolk come out, and interestingly enough, I would think they would say, wow, we want to know you. Will you teach us who you are? You got this incredible power, and they should be drawn to Jesus because of this power to heal. But instead, they're terrified of Jesus. They're terrified of the power that he has. They're scared of him. And so the response is, we don't understand you, and you got so much power, and you are so otherworldly. Would you please just go away and have nothing to do with us because we're scared of you? I think that's true today. I think people today are either drawn to Jesus by his majesty, his wonder, and his power, or they want to keep doing what they're doing and being who they are, and they're scared of facing him. I think that's still true today. So it brings us to this question. What is it demons want? Well, according to John 10:10, Jesus said, Satan and his minions, all of his demonic horde, they only want to steal, kill, and destroy. That's what they want. There's nothing, no other purpose they have. They want to steal everything they can steal and take and recapture the things that belong to God, the things that are wholesome and pure and wonderful, the things that God gives as great gifts to us. They will steal it. They will rob it if they can. The other thing they will do is they will kill and destroy anything that is good, anything that is wonderful. They want to kill it. They want to wipe it out, and they want to destroy anything that is built that is wonderful that belongs to God. Steal, kill, and destroy. They're still there. They want to steal our peace. They want to steal our awareness with God. They want to kill our spiritual life, absolutely destroy it and snuff out anything that we would have which would be drawn to God. They want to destroy our relationship with each other and with God and with the very planet we live in. That's what demons want to do. So the question that we have is, well, how do demons operate? Like, in what realm do they really operate? Let's put it this way: when we have problems, really difficult, struggling problems in ourselves, are they physical? Are they psychological? Or are they spiritual? In other words, are our problems just really chemistry and cellular structure and things going on inside our body? Are our problems physical? And then we would treat those things with medicine. We would treat them with surgery. We would treat them with pills. We would treat them with diet. We would treat our problems are just physical. Or are problems psychological, where they are mental disorders and temperament problems and personality disorders? Are our problems just that? Or are problems also spiritual? We are actually being affected by spiritual forces of good and evil, angelic and demonic, of God's spirit and of Satan's power. And the Bible would say to all three of these, the answer is yes. Some of our problems are physical. Some of our problems are psychological. Some of our problems are spiritual. Where does the demon attack? Where do they choose? Well, if a demon who's been around for centuries knows everything about humankind that they need to know, would they not be stupid to not attack you if they knew you had a physical problem, to exacerbate that and make it worse? If they knew you had a psychological problem, would they not attack you there and make that worse? And if it was a spiritual problem, would they not invite other demons of their kind to come and join in on the party and help make things even worse for you? The answer would be yes. Yes, they would. What's the hope we have? That they all cower in fear before Jesus Christ. We place our lives and our thoughts and our behaviors and our choices before Jesus Christ. They are left trembling. They are left in fear. They are left destroyed themselves because of the power of Jesus Christ. I notice in this story, the one thing I can't help but see is the heart of Jesus. He's on the other side of the Sea of Galilee when his story begins in Capernaum. He's popular. He's got thousands of people following him. He's doing miracles. He's rallied the boys. He's got his little club going. And these guys are going to be the apostles, and they don't even know what that means. He's got things happening. He's got followers. He's growing in strength, and he leaves it all and even risks the perilous journey across the Sea of Galilee in the dead of night when a storm is coming and the disciples are in fear for their very lives. Fishermen were in very fear for their lives, just to get over to the other side to heal one guy. And after he heals the one guy, the citizens come out and say, we're scared of you. Would you please leave? And he's like, okay, I'll go. And so he leaves. He does all of this for one tormented, broken, hurt, severely wounded, demon-oppressed man. This is Jesus. He will go to the depths of hell to free us. It's an amazing God. He gives up his throne of glory to come down. He says, oh, this is what I've come for. I have come to set people free, to release the prisoners trapped in darkness, to release those who are in prison, to open the eyes of the blind. This is what I've come for. And so for him to go and relieve that one man and only that one man and leave, great. That's what it's all worth it to him. And the one guy, it's interesting, he said, let me follow you, Jesus. I want to follow you. I want to be one of your apostles. I want to follow you. I want to be a disciple. And Jesus is like, no, go home. You need to go home and tell everybody. Sometimes Jesus tells people when he does a miracle, you be quiet. Don't tell anybody. Because he's in a region of the Jewish people and the concepts of Messiah were going to disrupt his ministry. But over in the Decapolis, they didn't have that concept. And so this guy goes and tells people, and it's interesting because this occurs in Mark chapter 5. Jesus will come back to the Decapolis in Mark chapter 7. After this guy has been out telling his story, they will start bringing people to Jesus to get healed. And by Mark chapter 8, he does a miracle in the Decapolis with the food where he multiplies the fish and the bread for them in the same way he had done for the more Orthodox Jews on the other side of the Sea of Galilee earlier. He will feed 4,000 the same way. That's our Jesus. That's who he is. That's our God. That's how far he would go to rescue you. Normally, when I end my sermons, I like to tell a little story so you can go back and do the study. Or I end with a story of my own. Well, this time, I'm not going to give a story of my own because this is the kind of tale that either by now you're dismissive, like, I don't believe any of this, or you've gotten fearful and it's kind of awakened something. You're like, I don't know if I want to go into these realms, or it's possible. You're like, I just want to go back to ignoring this spiritual reality that Jesus taught. Uh, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 says, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. That's the conflict we're in. We're not in a battle with other human beings. We're not Republicans versus Democrats and right wing versus left wing. And we're not in, that is not the situation that Christians find themselves in. We find ourselves in the powers of darkness are holding humanity captive on Satan's side, captive to do his will. And Jesus is kicking down doors and he's breaking through prison chains and he's setting people free. And he would love his Christian followers to help him in that process, to be with him as he does that work. And to do that well and wisely, some of us, we need to educate ourselves. And so this is a topic you can easily run off in and find yourself listening to some crazy wackos, right? And so you want to say, oh, if I'm going to learn, I need to start learning. What do I need to read? Okay, I'm going to give you some books to start off with. You're not going to learn this quickly, just like you're not going to learn this history of Western civilization in one talk, or you wouldn't learn astrophysics in one talk, right? So you're going to have to take some time if you want to study and get into the realms of spiritual warfare and begin learning what you need to learn. This is a great beginning book, The Bondage Breaker by Neil Anderson. Definitely, that would be the entry level, first read book I would recommend, which will introduce how to go about dealing with spiritual warfare, how to identify it. Even prayers are in this book of how to like cleanse your home, release your own life. Fantastic book, Neil T. Anderson's The Bondage Breaker. He has a follow-up book called Victory Over the Darkness. This one is more about dealing with psychological issues or depressive thoughts or suicide issues, whatever it might be. And then he will help set those sort of things free. Victory Over the Darkness deals with the mental stuff that comes with great books. Also, of course, Spiritual Warfare. Great book by Carl Payne. Spiritual Warfare, not a difficult read. Dr. Carl Payne, and I'm picking some super intellectually kind of more on the scholarly hardcore biblical guys that I'm going to be recommending. Let's see, Deliverance and Inner Healing. This one's a little different. This is by practitioners. Deliverance and Inner Healing by John and Mark Sanford. They're been right up here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and they actually have a clinic and they have a place where they can have people come and spend a weekend and deal with some inner healing, deal with some deliverance. And it's like, oh, when inner healing, what it is and what it's for and what it is not, types and functions of demons, healing and delivering people from the occult and cults, guidelines for determining when both deliverance and inner healing may be inappropriate. So it's a pretty good guidebook there. And of course, what's been known as sort of the definitive work, Spiritual Warfare, Ed Murphy. Almost everybody will quote Ed Murphy. He's a practitioner, not just a book reader. The guys who are just book readers will often have different views than the guys who are actually out there in the field doing work with demonic deliverance. This is hard. I mean, look how thick that is. It's not a book that you read because you just sit down and read it. Treat it more like an encyclopedia where you look stuff up and you use it as a reference manual as needed. Great reading, and you heard me read a section out of there to get understanding style. M. Scott Peck, who wrote the famous book, The Road Less Traveled, one of the premier psychologists in America. He's since passed on, and near the end of his life, actually gave his life to the Lord, became a Christian. He writes People of the Lie, and this is a book he wrote as a therapeutic psychologist. I can't remember which he was, and he could not fathom the nature of pure evil he was getting and experiencing in his therapeutic practice. And he came to the conclusion that there is such a thing as outside evil forces who influence people. He concludes his book by saying, I believe Satan is real. I have met it. And so here's a therapist who decided Christianity and the spiritual warfare and demonic beings were absolutely true. We see more of that in the medical and the psychiatric world. You're seeing a lot more of people willing to cross over. Super hard because, at least in the United States of America, their licenses are tied to very strict boundaries. And if they will go that direction, they kind of got to be quiet about it. C. Fred Dickinson, great scholar. He writes two books, Angels, Elect, and Evil, which is really a good doctrinal study of where do good angels and bad angels come from? What can they do? What do they do? And Demon Possession in the Christian was a super definitive work for a long time. And I'll just give you a summary. He starts off by saying, can Christians be demon possessed? And demonized is really the right word. Demon possessed is actually not a biblical term. Demonized or powered, having a demon power on you, is actually the actual biblical word. And he starts off the book by saying, I don't think so, and concludes the book by saying, yes, they can. Well worth the read. He's a scholar's scholar, so he's a brainiac guy. Definitely look at the scriptures. And then one that's kind of divisive and weird and gets a little bit of heat is God at War by Gregory Boyd. And he deals with more the realm of God is at war with Satan and how human beings sort of fit in this cosmic war between the good and evil of God and Satan. I've seen videos before or paintings before, like Jesus arm wrestling Satan, Jesus, and Satan over here. Jesus doesn't arm wrestle Satan. Jesus destroys him. This is not a power struggle of which one's stronger. Jesus crushes Satan's head. When Jesus encountered demonic beings, they fall at his feet terrified of him. It's not an arm wrestling match between good and evil. Jesus wins. Hands down. Jesus wins. So I would recommend taking a look at those books. I know that Boyd has a different view and got in a little trouble with the Baptists because he said, I don't know that God actually foreordains all the small particulars of life. He leaves a pretty broad range of human free will. And the Baptists didn't like that and got kind of mad at him. He was a Baptist himself. But those would be some books I would recommend as you begin your journey. There's a couple fictional works that are worth reading, but they don't do quite the biblical study that these books I just recommended do. One would actually be C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. It's a fictional book, but a great read because it's the idea of how do demons think when they attack human beings. And he probably captured that pretty accurately in his book. And there's a few others, but that's enough to get you going. Pray that God would bless you as he opens your eyes to the spiritual realms of deeper things. He sets you free, he heals you, he redeems you, and he makes you a champion in what he's doing in the world as he spreads his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven.